Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, stories, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out the articles, videos, and more at passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, join the community forum, and of course, attend the weekly online Global Passive House Happy Hour. Now, here's this week's Passive House podcast. G'day, welcome back to episode 31 of the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh coming to you from Auckland.
And I'm Zach Semke coming to you from Seattle.
How are you doing, Zach? How's things in Seattle?
Seattle is good. We just found out that our kids get to go back to school at least at like halftime on April 5th. So that feels like a huge reprieve.
Yeah, it's because how long is that?
It has been over.
How long has it been?
It has been over a year.
Over a year.
Yeah, just over a year. We just hit the year mark last week. Yeah. So it's been.
And I don't think anyone expected that when this was first, a year ago that would happen for so long.
I don't know if I've heard this term COVID. When people say, "How are you?" and you're okay, you're COVID okay, which if you have a lot to be thankful for.
Is that like the new normal?
Right. Well, if you've got a job and you're fairly sane and everyone's healthy, then you're COVID okay. So we have been COVID okay, and I'm very grateful for that. For sure. Yeah. And I'm also really grateful that school is about to open, at least halftime. Yeah. How have you been?
Well, meanwhile, on this side of the world, I'm a little bit hesitant to brag about it, but New Zealand did just win the America's Cup yesterday.
I saw that. Congratulations.
It's all celebrations down here, and there were a number of tens of thousands of people out. Very much not socially distancing, reveling in that fine win yesterday. So very exciting, but also obviously Italy's not having a great time right now either, and parts of Europe. But they did put up a very impressive challenge on the water, and some amazing technology out there. And I don't want to get too deep in the analogy, but I couldn't help thinking that New Zealand has yet again proven that we are masters at being able to control airflow when it counts. It would be nice if we could transfer some of that learning, some of that skill into our building science, where we are probably at the other end of the scale. We are very much down the bottom of the ladder, not up the top. So we need some of those scientists to start designing better houses now, not just faster boats.
So you're saying that you're not going to win the Passive House Cup?
We are not going to win the Passive House Cup, which should be a thing. We should introduce that.
Yeah,
yes.
Definitely. The Passive House Accelerator Passive House Cup.
Yeah. It would not be New Zealand's cup. Not at the moment anyway. Let's, before we crack into this week's interview, we've got a few people to thank for the Passive House podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So our sponsors that make everything possible are, our founding sponsors are 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxtingwe Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minotaur All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, RDH Building Science, StoCorp, and Zola Windows. And our stakeholder partner is NYSERDA. And the week that we will be publishing this podcast episode, the sponsor of the week is 475 High Performance Building Supply. So we'll be supported by them throughout the week for all of our events, and also we'll be showcasing them for a component spotlight.
Awesome. Love their work. And that's sure to be a great component spotlight because they do fantastic work and videos, content all the time. If you haven't already, you should definitely check out 475 on YouTube and social media because they've got some, we refer to it all the time, put it that way.
Yeah.
It's great stuff.
Indeed.
Let's talk about Clare Parry, our wonderful guest, another very inspiring woman in architecture and in the sector. Most Australians who know even a little bit about Passive House will probably know about Clare Parry. If they haven't met her personally, then they will have certainly been impacted by her leadership. As we discuss in this interview, Clare had to travel to New Zealand here to attend the certified Passive House training because at the time there weren't any trainings available in Australia. And she became one of the first certified designers there. And in fact, there wasn't any training in Australia until Clare herself set it up. She went on to become the founding chair of the Australian Passive House Association, which is now very well established and is one of only 2 Passive House certifiers in the country. Amongst all that, she is also very experienced in a number of other rating tools from WELL to Green Star, which is the Australian version of LEED, and a number of other rating tools. So we talk a little bit about the crossover of Passive House and rating tools in this interview. But I started out asking Clare how she got into architecture and the building industry in the first place.
All right. Well, thank you, Clare. It's great to get the chance to chat with you. For those that, I mean, a lot of people will know you because you've been around the scene in the Passive House world for a while in this part of the world. But let's go back to how you got involved in architecture and just the building industry to start with. Where did that all start?
Well, I guess my whole career is kind of just suck it and see kind of thing. Like coming out of high school, I really didn't know what I was going to do, but I love maths, I love physics, I love design, and I actually ended up in engineering. And then after that degree was complete, I went for a few interviews, not knowing what I wanted to do, got into building services, and then got put into sustainability/mechanical design, and quickly realised that mechanical design wasn't for me. So, I'm kind of like still figuring out what I want to be when I grow up, but I quite like what I'm doing. So, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, it's interesting because that's kind of the only place where people who wanted to get into sustainability, if that meant energy efficiency, was plugging into the mechanical services team, which were usually mechanical engineers who ended up doing air conditioning design. Is that sort of where you got pegged?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the best sustainability consultants do come through the building services side of things, I guess, because sustainability can be very technical. Yep. But yeah, there's a whole host of ways you can approach it and find your strength. Sustainability is so broad, so yeah.
Absolutely. And that's kind of ironic because if you do a half-decent building envelope design, you sort of design out most of the mechanical plant.
It's funny you say that. I mean, when I got into Passive House, I didn't tell my boss. I actually just went and did the course without telling him because I was like, this is totally against everything that we work for to design out the services, which is my, kind of my job. So
I'm going to go and do a course and learn how to minimise what we can offer.
Yeah, I was like, I'm not very good at this anyway. I'll find a way to not have to do it so much.
How did that come about? Do you remember the first time you heard about Passive House?
I do, yeah. I was actually working on at that time it was touted as one of the most sustainable buildings in Australia. And it just so happened that on that same site, it was a multi-building site, there was another building, and that building was going to be built, it was proposed to be building it to Passive House standard. And I just kind of went, haven't heard of this one before, and kept digging. Yeah. And from there, I was like, where can I do a course? And I had to go to New Zealand, Cara Rosemeyer.
Yeah. Because when was this?
2011.
Yeah. So 10 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
And well, a few people that I've spoken to in Australia have mentioned Cara, and that they were able to do a course in Sydney and Melbourne with Cara. But you were even before that time, right? You actually that wasn't an option. You had to come to New Zealand here to do one of the New Zealand courses.
Yeah, yeah. Which I didn't mind at all, like a little jaunt across the ditch. So, and in actual fact, after that, well, at that time, I was one of only 3 or 4 designers in Australia.
Yeah.
And there wasn't really any work. It was kind of just one of those out of interest things to know about. But then we actually set up a course in Melbourne, and there's a whole cohort of people that came and did that.
So that project, before we get on to the how you develop Passive House in Australia, that project, how sustainable was it?
The one that I was working on, or the other one?
Yeah.
It's bling. It's a great project in what it is, but it flies on the face of Passive House. Yeah. Right.
And you've got lots of experience in sustainable environmental ratings, right? You've worked with Green Star. You've got LEED accreditation.
Yeah.
Have you done LEED in Australia, or is that through work overseas?
No, I've done LEED in Australia. So I've worked on. I think it remains the highest rating LEED building in the world. Is actually in Melbourne. So I've worked quite extensively with a lot of rating tools, and I still keep coming back to Passive House.
Yeah. Do you see them working together any more, or are they still kind of clients choosing one or the other?
I see Passive House as fundamental to good building design, and you don't even have to call it Passive House, but a good building envelope with streamlined systems is the basis for basically all of those tools. And we've also, I was part of the team that helped set up the Green Star crosswalk. So they're all complementary. I'm yet to find something that really sort of doesn't work with Passive
And what
House.
about Well? How has that got much traction in Australia?
It does actually have quite a lot of traction, yeah. There's, particularly at the commercial scale, like the really big buildings, there's a lot of those that propose to go to Well standard. There's a bit going on in that space, yeah.
Yeah. So Passive House, you become one of only a handful of Passive House designers in Australia, and you humbly mentioned that you set up a course, which is no small achievement to get a course up and running. Where was that, Melbourne or Sydney?
Melbourne. Yeah.
In Melbourne. Where to from there?
I guess we also set up, I think slightly before that, or maybe roughly at the same time, the Australian Passive House Association. Myself and another couple of guys, David Power and Chris Baguette, and from there, I guess we just kept going. We set up a conference, we had more courses, we had events regularly, and a lot of it just came out of people asking, where can I learn more? Where can I connect with people in this industry? Projects started coming online. We just had to deal with inquiries from project teams, and it's all become quite big and fantastic. The community's great.
Well, yeah. How do you feel now when you look at what the Australian Passive House Association has become? It's got staff now. It's got a big board. It's people basically apply to be on the board. It's not just, I'll do it because somebody needs to do it. Does that give you a sense of pride in where it's come in those 10 years?
Yeah, for sure, it does. But I know how much hard work has gone in from so many people. So, it definitely does, to think of the first coffee that the three of us had back in the day. And we just kept pushing and putting in our time and energy. And it's pretty thrilling.
So you were director there. You're one of the founding chair of the association, but you had a day job as well to pay the bills. So you carried on working as a designer, but you also became one of the first assessors. Is that right for Australia?
Yes. So, and really that was out of demand for certifiers locally. So people were having to go to Ireland and Germany, to get their certifiers on their project. And the response time was really slow. It's a different time zone. It just wasn't working. So myself and actually Luke Plowman at the exact same time, went to the same course, turned up in Germany, and there's the other person sitting in this room halfway across the world.
Yeah. And like you say, great that there was a demand, and clearly it's only grown from there. Was that the bulk of what you were doing when you set up Gruen Consulting?
Certification was a bit slower. I will say that. When I started Gruen, we were mostly doing consulting.
Yeah,
and it was broader than Passive House, but it ended up becoming predominantly Passive House consulting and certification. Yeah, and that was again. I was actually on maternity leave, and I had clients ringing me saying, "Can you just do this? Can you just do this?" And I thought, well, maybe now's the time to do this.
Yeah. Start charging them for it.
Absolutely.
You need a name and a logo.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to the by that say around 2015, people knew who you were in the industry. You're sort of a regular feature of a lot of conferences, and they knew that if they wanted some great answers and some good consulting, then there was only a handful of people to come to, and you were certainly one of them. So like you say, it probably a good step and a relatively obvious one in retrospect. But again, really great that there was so much demand that you were able to fulfill. Take us forward through to today. Tell us what you're up to and how you've come to be doing that.
Well, with a lot of, I guess, persistence, Gruen grew. Project-wise, manpower-wise, we still stayed pretty small. So more certification, more consulting. I left Gruen at the end of last year and joined another consultancy. When I left, I think they had roughly 100 projects on the books.
Gruen Consulting had 100?
Yeah.
Wow.
So at all sorts of stages of design and certification. So I mean, that's pretty exciting coming from, a tiny project that started me out right at the start to have 100 projects. Yeah.
I mean, it's a great sign for Passive House in Australia in general.
Absolutely. Yeah. I still remember back in the day where I knew every project in Australia. I knew where it was and who was working on it. And now I love hearing about bigger and more diverse projects every day. Still doing a lot of Passive House, mostly certification these days. But I mean, as I mentioned, Passive House still, I think, is one of the best baseline, starting points for great buildings. So we start with Passive House, and then we look at life cycle assessments and embodied carbon and social outcomes and, constructability. Yeah, the much broader picture.
That's quite exciting. So tell us about life cycle analysis and carbon accounting. Is that's becoming more of a thing?
Definitely, yeah.
Is it a requirement, or is it people doing it for marketing or for being good citizens?
Bit of everything. So it's it comes into play in a couple of council zones around Australia. There's one in Perth, for example, that ask for an LCO as part of their planning process. In Green Star, a lot of projects are doing it. Otherwise, projects might do it for carbon neutral certification, and then we've just got projects that are they just want to know where they sit so they can make improvements.
And is that completely separate to, say, the PHPP modelling, or does your Passive House design feed into that life cycle analysis?
Well, we're trialling a few tools, and one of them actually plugs into the PHPP.
Right.
But there are other tools that are web-based, for example, like eTool. Yeah.
So it's still useful to have to be doing the PHPP because you're figuring out the energy use,
Yeah.
and that would be I'm imagining, like I haven't done any LCA myself, but I'm imagining that's quite an important component of figuring out that carbon footprint.
Yeah, and it depends on the purpose you're doing the LCA for. Some of them include the operational energy, some of them are just the product, so that, the building itself, not the operational
Right.
side. So there's a huge array of questions and methodologies and outputs.
So that sounds like the industry is still figuring out standards for how to do that across the board in Australia.
Well, yeah, internationally there's not really... there are broadly accepted definitions of carbon neutral, but there's no one definitive definition.
Right.
Yeah, it's a muddy area.
Yeah. You mentioned measuring social outcomes as well, looking at social benefits and social outcomes. How do you measure that?
There's a whole bunch of tools and methods and strategies. Broadly speaking, our team gets involved with communities on a granular level or with councils and governments at a higher level.
Right.
And there could be a whole host of things that people are looking at. But, the community engagement stuff is a part that I'm quite excited to start getting involved with. All of that stuff's kind of new to me, but this team's really engaged with that kind of work.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard presentations from the likes of Brom and Parry and people from the UK that talk about anecdotal stories of improved social outcomes of passive house buildings. But it'd be great to see some data on that and have measured outcomes from different building typologies and just see how that affects more than just indoor air quality.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What advice would you give to people, and particularly young women getting into the industry? You mentioned right at the start that you were you liked the maths, you liked engineering right from the start. Were there some? Did you come across any barriers, and do you have any recommendations for young people getting into just the building industry in general?
Yeah, I think right when I started, there are a couple of barriers, and I mean one of them was technical or finding information, and I think we're largely working to overcome that. Like Passive House Accelerator is a great example of a central resource where you can get lots of different information. I guess the others might be individual, and one of my personal barriers was, I guess, asking for help or making connections. But that is really important, and I was pretty lucky that I was able to find ways to overcome that.
Yeah,
because I was insanely shy back then, and I doubted my technical ability. But I think just opening up and having those conversations and seeking networks and going to events. And one of the best things I did in hindsight was actually when I learnt something, I wrote an article or shared it or, even just got on LinkedIn.
Right.
Yeah. And actually what that meant was that if somebody else was looking for that information, they generally, I was lucky to be one of the first in Australia to sort of be publishing this sort of information. So when people were looking for that information, they found me. And I think that, so you referred to like people knowing about me as one of the pioneers in the industry, which isn't exactly true. Like there were definitely people before me. I was just vocal. So getting involved and getting out there. Yeah.
Yep. No, but I'd say, you use the term lucky, but I think it's definitely a case of certainly making some of that luck happen.
Sure.
And I think anyone looking at your LinkedIn profile would not think that you're a shy person in a good way. It's just so much there that you've accomplished and been a leader. But I think that's a really important message as well for people who do feel that they like to be a little bit behind the scenes or a bit quieter. How could I possibly make a difference? And you're a great example of doing that and putting yourself out there. It doesn't necessarily have to be making a loud noise out in the street,
no,
singing and dancing all the time, but making a noise through your results and through all the way that you've pulled people together and been a real leader. where do you see things going? What's the next, say, if you have to look out 5 years' time for specifically for Passive House in Australia, what do you see that looking like?
I think that there's going to be a better appreciation of actually the outcomes of what we're aiming for. At the moment, I think we're already seeing that transition, but previously we had just so much white noise in the industry. There's a lot of badges and logos, and one of the great strengths of Passive House is the outcomes, healthy, comfortable buildings that cost less to run. And perhaps people need to, there's a lot more awareness out there. Passive House is about to get on Grand Designs Australia, which is
awesome.
Which is going to be pretty amazing.
Yep.
There's a whole lot more projects that are getting a lot of press. People are appreciating the quality of buildings and the fact that who cares about the badge? Look at the building; it's fantastic. Yeah. And I think in part, I was going to say.
Acceptance. So, I mean, one of the big barriers is when people first hear about it is airtightness and not wanting to be shut in. Australia's a beautiful country, got this great outdoors, and people want to, that connection with the outdoors. Is that being overcome, or is that being addressed?
It's definitely a conversation I've had on a lot of projects, and Brum and Barry's actually talked about this in a lot of detail. People have this perception. It's a perception issue, really, in a lot of levels. People have this perception that they love to be indoor outdoor, and we don't really live like that as much as we think. But also helping people understand that you can have that as well. We just need to celebrate those great projects that showcase that.
Yeah, awesome. Well, keep up the good work. I'm excited to see what you get up to next, and in your current roles, because I know that you're still involved in a few different things. Always got something on the go.
Always.
So well done, and it's been I think you really have been a real leader in the field in this part of the world. So it's been great having you being such a good advocate. So thank you.
No worries. Thank you very much.
And that was Clare Parry. How did you like that interview, Zach?
It was great. I mean, it's so inspiring to hear the origin story of Australia Passive House Association, and to understand the role that Clare has played in making Passive House really happen. I mean, clearly, she was among a group of pioneers and early adopters, and the steps that she took, for instance, to make certification easier, all of that was really, really fun to learn about.
I think it's really important to acknowledge that, and just think it's almost hard to imagine what it would be like compared with now, where you can just look up a course and register for it, and then send off your certification, or ask someone local about certification. Where when Claire had this, as she described it, a project land on her desk, and to go and find out about this thing called Passive House, there was just nothing there, and she had to go and do all that research, and then go on and basically, literally get things set up herself and collaborate with others to get things moving. And now Australian Passive House is, like I said, employs staff. They've got a big team. They run biannual conferences in conjunction with the Passive House Institute New Zealand, and this year are launching quite a extensive education program as well. So onwards and upwards, but it started from very small, pretty humble beginnings.
Right, and it was fun to hear her talk about the early days when she knew all of the people who were involved in all the Passive House projects, and now there's too much going on to track it all. And the fact that just a year ago when she left Gruen Consulting, that the firm had 100 projects on the books. I mean, that's a lot. Yeah. That's a lot of Passive House work. It's
and as someone in New Zealand, I have to say that they have well and truly overtaken us. We still have the claim of the first passive house in Australasia here in Auckland, and for a couple of years, I think we were just inching ahead. We had more certified projects, but Australia has just taken off, and they've got the accommodation, student accommodation. They've got more different types of buildings now, and a lot more on the books in the design phase and being constructed. So yeah, onwards and upwards. It's really, really exciting.
You're saying they have the regional passive house cup then? There's probably a better name for it, right? But
that's right. Well, like yeah, but it's a numbers game as well. Yeah, we've got 5 million people here. They've got 25 million, pushing 30 million.
I see.
So.
Good. Your competitive spirit's coming through. I like
that. Yeah. Let's not go there. You mentioned collaboration. Obviously, that's been a big theme. It always is a big theme. Claire, she's very humble. She's been a big leader, and she's been a driving force behind a lot of these things that she's been involved in starting up. But she does acknowledge that she's had help along the way, and partly through her own sharing. And she's put stuff out there, but she's also got other people on board and got people around her, and it's been a bit of a team effort, and it continues to be a team effort. And we see that more, across the board with Passive House, that people are very willing to share ideas and reach out and collaborate with others as well, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, that was one thing that really came through when you were asking her about advice for young women, young professionals starting out, and that the role that just where she took some early steps to sort of find her voice. She described herself as really shy when she was young, but then she started, when she learned something, she'd share it. She'd write something about it or share it on social media. And it sounded like that really kind of snowballed into being kind of an authority, a thought leader in this area. And I think I'm not an authority or a thought leader, but I do have experience with that, the stepping out of one's comfort zone and starting to speak or write, and how powerful that can be. And so it's great. I think it's so important to encourage young people to do that. And that, we don't, when we do that, we don't have to be perfect, and but that kind of spirit of sharing and active sharing can be really powerful for one's career.
Absolutely, so and there's no better place to do that than joining in on the Passive House Accelerator Global Happy Hour, Tech Tuesdays. They're super friendly, as well as being really informative, and it's great to see those audiences. People just keep coming back and slowly growing as well, and people willing to share. I love the fact that people are also very open to asking all types of questions, from really, really detailed questions through to quite basic questions, and quite often those will get answered in the chat stream, and other people contributing.
Yeah, I like to see that too. It's if we weren't getting basic questions, which are so important, I think it would be an indication that we were not really successful. We need to be bringing new people into the fold on all of this.
Yeah. Something else that strikes me, even before talking to Claire, just looking through all her experience in the field, looking at her LinkedIn profile, I'm on a little bit of a campaign right now to be nice to rating tools, because I know that they it can be a bit of controversy. People who are very involved in one area have a tendency or can be lured into thinking that is the way, and disregard some of the other rating tools out there. Claire has a huge amount of experience in the local energy rating scheme in Australia, which is Neighbours, run by the Green Building Council Australia. Also their Green Star program. She's a lead accredited professional. She's done well, which I'm really interested in. That seems to be a growing movement as well. So she's a well accredited professional. If people don't know what that is, then check out the Well Building Institute rating, and one or two others as well. So she's got a huge amount of experience, and you never hear people like Clare talk badly about any of those in particular, which I think is really important, because there is a place for all of those, and I'd like to think that they can all play nicely and be applied together in certain situations. Certainly, Passive House is a really great foundation for any way you want to go in terms of overall sustainability and producing a building that is as best that it can be in the environment, for the environment, but also for the people. So if you do Passive House, it opens up the opportunities to do those other ratings, and they don't have to be mutually exclusive.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this up. I couldn't agree more. And and that's really consistent with the goals of the accelerator, the Passive House Accelerator. And when we have Passive House in the name, and the real goal here for our work is to accelerate the adoption of buildings that are better for people, and buildings that reduce and go toward zero carbon. And there are lots of different elements of that. And I think that it's the fact that Passive House has this really kind of laser focus and really a lot of depth in energy performance and comfort allows it to play so well with other certification systems. Yeah. Because it's not as if we're talking about the same kind of broad sustainability reach that LEED goes from native plants to bike racks to the energy systems of buildings, right? Passive House has nothing to say about native plants or bike racks, but it can help be the engine to make the energy performance piece of LEED happen. The same is true for living buildings. Passive House is the way to make net zero performance happen, and for that to be predictable and actually something that people can count on.
Yeah.
So it's that.
Or it can be the engine, or not the engine, the lack of engine.
Right, there you go. Yeah, I know. So the engine. I know.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that idea.
It can be the sail. It can be the high tech
sail. Yeah, we like sails here in New Zealand.
Yeah, exactly.
Ones that make boats fly on their wings. I like that. I love that idea of a mechanical engineer trained as a mechanical engineer ending up designing out all the mechanical engineering.
And how she was...
I've heard that before. I've heard that because that has been the traditional way for people to get into this thing about energy efficiency. You look at where the energy has been consumed. That's usually the plant, the air conditioning system, the building services as they described. Well, you could make the building serve the people and therefore reduce the reliance on these big boxes that you have to stick on the roof that you call building services. And it is totally counterintuitive to what I imagine a building services company sets out to do, which is to usually sell the biggest unit they can.
Yeah, I liked the anecdote there that how she was surreptitious about it.
Yeah. How about we make this thing smaller?
Right, and what an idea that the building itself can drive performance rather than just doing a crappy building and stuffing it with a bunch of mechanical equipment to make up for those deficiencies.
Yeah. Anything else from that you picked up?
I think that it's another example of somebody. I think she found this truth, which was, and there were a couple of quotes that she said. She said, "I see Passive House as fundamental to good building design and a good building envelope, with streamlined systems as the basis." Right, and so that's I think my takeaway was that's her North Star. As long as we're talking, the North Star doesn't really help with in the Southern Hemisphere, does it? That doesn't really help.
Well, no, we
navigation
still refer to that. We have the
Okay.
Southern Cross, but
all right. Okay, Southern Cross. So she had her Southern Cross to guide her understanding also of the broader picture of certifications likely and of delivery of sustainable design. So and she's been really adept at communicating that. So
yeah.
Good on Clare.
Final point from me is that this month has been about inspiring inspirational women in architecture, and I have to say that it hasn't been that much of a challenge for us to find inspiring women. Which we should all take. We should all just acknowledge that there are so many. I mean, there are people involved each week on the various shows through the accelerator. So many out there that it's not that hard to go and find someone like Clare that is an inspiration. And I really like that acknowledgement, that encouragement to young people, and particularly young women setting out to not have any boundaries. There don't have to be boundaries there. You know, there's you can go and do what you want to do, and in Clare's spirit, if it doesn't exist, then create it.
Yeah, right. I mean, March is we're inspired by the fact that International Women's Day is in March, and so that has been a focus. But I think you're right. The reality is that Passive House is an industry that's led by women, and it's so. I think this is women's voices will be central to all these programs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. All right. That pretty much wraps it up for this week. We got any other announcements, things coming up?
Yes. So in addition to a bunch of educational programming that we'll share in show notes, we have some cool programming coming up this week at the Accelerator. So Passive House Accelerator Construction Tech will feature Cliff Chambers and Luis Garcia, who are both site supers in New York City, and they're going to be presenting site super insights of Passive House projects.
Awesome.
On Tuesday, Wednesday, your time. And then the Global Passive House Happy Hour will feature architect In Cho, and she'll be presenting about a PHI retrofit of a townhouse in Manhattan. Really cool project that I've seen some video footage of for the Wednesday episode. So please join us for that. And then on Thursday, last but not least, on Thursday, we have Nick Shaw of 475 High Performance Building Supply presenting the Passive House Component Spotlight. He'll be presenting 475 materials and application for smart enclosure design. So this is a chance for you to if you're a practitioner or a building owner, you can come there, learn a little bit about what they have to offer, and then bring your questions for Nick, because there's going to be a really lively question and answer session after his presentation.
I have to say, it's really exciting to see all these projects come through, these retrofit projects, and getting into the details of them. They're always a bit of an adventure because you never know how they're going to turn out or what you're going to encounter along the way. And they are a challenge, but it's such important work. You know, most of the buildings that are going to exist for the next couple of decades already exist. So figuring out how to deal with those is super important, and it's great to see these. So yeah, I really encourage people to come along and check those out. Even if you're not like I am in that area, there's a whole bunch of different things that have to be accounted for in different municipalities and different areas, but a lot of the learning is still really relevant and super interesting.
Agreed.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Zach. Great week. Glad that things are starting to turn the corner for you guys, getting out and seeing each other in real life again. Hopefully we'll return to a new normal and be more than just COVID okay in the very near future.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. And congratulations to New Zealand for your win.
Thank you. All right, we'll catch you all next week on the Passive House podcast. Thanks for listening in.